Jomeo, Jomeo, wherefore art thou, Jomeo? Deny thy Ponderosa boundary line and refuse thy name. Yep, you guessed it. We have our theme for today. Last time it was Mazeppa, and this week it's Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Not only is this one a direct reference to Romeo and Juliet, so much so that IMDb describes Joe and Amy as star-crossed lovers, but it's also Joe's very first romance episode with a girl his own age. And I'm deliberately not counting Sarah Tucci from Henry Comstock because that didn't amount to much. And Julia Bulette was just his surrogate mama, so we're gonna forget about that. The episode opens with the Cartwrights' one-eyed foreman watching men cutting down a tree on a piece of land that we are meant to assume is part of the vast and expansive Ponderosa. A man named Pete Jessup, played by James Coburn in his first appearance on the show, is with one Jason Carter, played by S. John Lawner, talking about how cutting down just one tree will cause Ben Cartwright, and owner of the neighboring ranch, the Concho, Luther Bishop, to start fighting. Makes sense. I mean, who doesn't have at least one neighbor that they absolutely cannot stand? The Cartwrights ride up to meet their foreman, Willard Trump. Geez. I hope YouTube doesn't scan this video, hear that name, and make assumptions. Okay, just to be safe, from here on out, he's Captain One-Eye. It's fine. He turns out to be not a nice person anyway. And I'm not making fun of the disabled people just to do it. As we talked about in the last video, I am the disabled. As an aside, I'm writing this before that video goes up, so technically y'all don't even know that yet. Anyway, as the boys ride up, it's the exact shot from the opening credits. Captain One-Eye tells them about the tree cutting going on at a place called the Truckee Strip. Just one more little aside from my personal life. I shared my love of Bonanza with my grandma for years. When she first watched this episode, she thought, in all honesty, that it was called the Turkey Strip, and went on to call it that until I explained to her that it was not, in fact, a strip of land dedicated to the Cartwrights' turkey-raising shenanigans. Although if anybody ever writes a fanfic like that and brings it to my attention, I'll probably review it on this channel. I don't think I have a scheduled video in November yet. Just saying. Joe takes off in hot pursuit of one of the tree murderers when he loses their trail near a creek bed, whereupon he hears some rustling behind a bush. He draws his gun and warns them to come out or he's gonna shoot. Who actually shows theirself is a startled, half-naked, at least by 1800 standards, girl holding out her dress in front of her. He puts his gun away and smirks that dang smirk while calling her a trespasser. She informs him that actually, no, this is her pa's land, and he's totally the problem. Cue rom-com music. I just knocked over my headphones. He realizes that she's little Amy Bishop. He complies with her request to turn around so she can get herself decent. During her attempt at redress, a huge frog jumps out in front of her bare feet and she squeals. Joe, no joke, jumps over the length of the pond to her like frickin' Spider-Man. He somehow thinks that pressing her body up against his will do, something? I assume? She assures him that it was just a peeping frog, and he turns around again, and it's all good. After some small talk, he leaves and gives her the old, "You trespass here often?" line. She cheerfully says she comes most every day. He leaves without confirming that he will be back by accident somehow again someday. You just go ahead and tell the boy you just met where you are every single day without any type of supervision and no one to hear you scream, but just that frog. Now that I think about it, for a family who cares so much about keeping this land on the Ponderosa, they sure don't know about the little squatter who's there every day dipping her feet in that frog's water. That should have been his argument with Ben later on, honestly. "Pa, the barefoot princess and the frog use it more than we do. It's not worth it, Pa." Instead, Joe hangs out by the fireplace that night and listens as Ben goes on and on about Luther using the land. He exposits that a court order said it was the Ponderosa's land and not the Concho, the land the bishops hail from. Joe decides he's had enough and asks Ben if it's all worth it. This is where we find out how Captain One-Eye got his name, or his fancy eye patch. Turns out Luther Bishop shot him in the face during the war. That's right, kids. If you've never read about the Truckee Strip War of 18... you're not getting your money's worth in education. It would actually be interesting if, in the later episode where Adam becomes a teacher and starts teaching territorial history, he would have added that to the course. Probably too painful for Joe, though. But he's not in the classroom, so it's fine. We should have learned about the Truckee Strip War. Justice for the Truckee Strip War. Hashtag justice for the Truckee Strip War. Ben gives Joe a lecture about how you can't just stand by and watch someone steal from you or from someone else. Joe goes to bed without supper, feeling defeated. At the concho, Double Agent Jessup is playing the part of the devil on Luther Bishop's shoulder, trying to tell him that he should take Jason Carter up on an offer to buy timber off the Truckee Strip. Jason Carter, remember, is the other man who was with Jessup when he hired men to cut down a tree already, something Luther clearly knows nothing about. Again, I ask, you love this land so much, yet things go on that you know nothing about. Jessup calls him Luther in a bold move which implies that the older man trusts him. Gee, I hope that never comes back to bite you, Lou. The conversation gets a little heated after Luther mentions that Jessup's brother was killed in the fight over the land by a Ponderosa man. Jessup acts like he sort of blames Luther for that before storming out. Luther then goes into Amy's bedroom just off the side of the house, and they have a sweet little talk about how he wanted to build a life for Amy's mother, who died too soon. Sounds like something he and Ben could have bonded over. No, I don't mean the dead wife. That happened quite a lot back then. What I mean is building homes with lots of land just for their kids. After Luther says goodnight and leaves, Amy senses someone watching her from out her window. We see it's Jessup, who must have gone over there as soon as he walked out of the house after talking to Luther a few minutes ago. Sheesh, everybody wants to get a peek at Amy in this episode. Creepy! I guess that frog wasn't so bad after all when compared to certain others. So yeah, Jessup is a jeepers creeper who is probably at least Adam's age, whereas Amy is around Joe's age. Poor Luther seems to think of him as one of the family, and so he probably assumes that Jessup himself regards Amy as kind of a little sis. Yeah, maybe if this were a Nabokov book. Look that one up, kids. It'll be funny, I promise. Back to Romeo and Amiette the next day. He shows up again on the strip where she just happens to be and asks her if she's seen his cow. She looks at him wide-eyed and just shakes her head. I mean, reasonable. I've never had that line given to me, but I don't know that it would have worked on me either. Keep those standards high, Amy. But her resolve breaks pretty quickly as she invites him to stay so she can pet his horsey. Valid. He tells her that Cooch likes her and neither of them take just anybody. Some hand-holding takes place and she says it will never work. He tells her it can because she's got bare feet and the biggest eyes he's ever seen. Again, who taught you pick-up lines, boy? Your pa was married a few times. Ask him what you should say to a girl. Clearly he knows a thing or two. In town, Carter tells an associate to instruct the bank not to give Luther any money. We can deduce that he's pretty important in town. Luther stops in and has already figured out that it was Carter who stopped the bank from giving him a loan. He stands up to Carter and turns him down again. He loves the land too much to destroy it for the sake of money. I wonder who else might feel that way. Maybe Joe and Amy should have just sat them both down and tried to compare notes on what they had in common. Of course, Jessup appears from the back room after his boss leaves, and he talks with his other boss about how he needs some discreet men. Carter doesn't want to get his hands dirty. Jessup tells him he's already involved in an ominous line that goes nowhere because we never see Carter again after this. Really disappointing. Jessup and the boys, he must have gotten all by himself, steal a few Cartwright horses. I should say borrow because he puts them right back after he uses them to trick some of Luther's men and shoots one of them down in cold blood. Actually, the one who is shot is played by Bob Miles, Michael Landon's stunt double. So there's that. Back at the house, Hoss knocks on Joe's door in a moment that stands out for me in Joe Hoss scenes over the course of the series. He wants to help his baby brother. Joe says, "No thanks, horse." Mike must have slipped and they just never caught it. Hoss tells him there's nothing he can't talk to Ben about and Joe retorts that Hoss has never gone to Ben with anything like this. Before he leaves, Joe jumps up and assures him that everything will be alright. He's the one with the problem, but he wants Hoss to feel reassured. I love it. Back at Casa del Concho, Jessup comes in just on cue and does a great job of acting outraged when he meets with Luther about the killing, and the smile that he has on his face while Luther's back is turned is pure evil, and Coburn is the best at it. Luther's had enough and agrees to take Jason Carter's offer. He's now willing to compromise on his love of the land just to spite the Ponderosa. Early in the morning, Hoss tells Ben that 3 horses are running loose in the pasture. Ben chides him for leaving the gate open, but he's sure that he didn't. When asking after Joe's whereabouts, Adam tells Ben that he's out looking for strays. Ben remarks that there are more than usual lately. Captain One-Eye informs them that there's a lumber camp set up on the strip and they're sawing away. Adam says he warned them about that. One-Eye says that the only warning Bishop knows is killing. He then rubs his eye patch. After Ben says they'll be right with him, he rubs his eye patch again, just to make sure that we get it, that he hates Luther for blinding him in that eye. Do you get it? Do you get it? Joe and Amy are still oblivious to the whole thing, and she's reading him poetry, forgetting that's not the Cartwright who appreciates poetry. You're thinking of the older one, Aim. Anyway, she's reading, what a shock, Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. It's like they don't trust us to get the theme. She quizzes Joe, who clearly does not get it, and instead turns it into a way of flirting with her. She totally goes for it, and of course they kiss. The boy is obviously bored to tears, so it's actually nice of him to let her read to him in the first place. Adrian Hayes is adorable with her doe eyes, and I absolutely love it. I ship these two so hard. But Joe's got a Joe, and Cartwright's got a Cartwright, so their chances don't look good. Again, this is Romeo and Juliet. That doesn't end too well either. He tells her that they're going to have to come clean eventually, and she doubts they'll ever let them be together. Then he hits her with a marriage proposal, which she never technically says yes to. Her response is to ask him if he really wants to marry her. I guess that's one way to respond to being told that your mouth is like a rose. In what way exactly, Joe? It's red? It's soft? It grows in a bush? It attracts bees? Before we can find out the answer, the peeping foreman catches them together and rides off with a look of either satisfaction or jealousy on his face. I honestly can't tell. I assume he isn't happy about it based on how he was spying on her before. Then again, he can definitely use it to take Luther off. Something that he never actually does. It was right there, buddy. You could have used it. Another tactic in case the tree chopping didn't work. Or the murder. Or the double agent taming. Ben, the boys, and the pirate foreman ride into the lumber camp. A young Chinese boy sees them coming and quickly ducks into one of the tents like he has seen one of them before. Pirate Man makes eye contact with him, and we know that he's the one the boy is hiding from. Ben questions one of the other men after Luther and is told he is probably still up at the house. Then Ben hears screaming from inside the tent. The foreman has gone and killed this boy by strangling him to death. Okay, so this isn't great. I don't like this scene. The fact is that we never find out why he did it. The boy is the son of Luther's cook. That is where we start and end in our list of things we find out about him. Besides the fact that his father's name is Lo Chow, and his name is Sun. When Ben confronts Trump, he says nothing. He starts to strangle Ben, leading to a fight with Hoss that Hoss ends up winning. We never see One-Eye again. Joe shows up just after the fight and is furious. He blames Ben because the warring of the families made One-Eye a little bit crazy. He insists upon taking the boy to his father on the Concho. Ben refuses to let him because he knows it could lead to his being killed. One father already has lost a son. Ben doesn't want to have to share in this man's sorrow. Joe holds a gun on Ben and says he's going to go no matter what. Once Ben's demeanor softens, Joe realizes what he's done and apologizes before going off to do what he feels he has to. Adam worries they'll shoot Joe before he can explain, and this is the most passionate dialogue Purnell gets in this tiny handful of lines they give him in this episode. I don't know if he was starting to feel a twinge of regret this early in the series, but he does tend to look a little bored in this episode. I don't blame him. He literally has nothing to do but stand around and maybe deliver a small line here and there. I mean, I get it. It's a Joe episode, so Joe's going to get the most lines. That being said, Ben and Haas both get great scenes with Joe throughout. Adam is just kind of there. Joe goes right up to the Bishop house and explains what happened to Luther, who is understandably upset. Just as Adam predicted, though, Joe is shot at by Jessup first. Luther tells him not to shoot, though. Luther calls Joe a liar when he says that Ben didn't order the killing of the boy. Then he tells Joe about the man who was killed when the horses were stolen/borrowed from the Ponderosa. The cook and father of the murdered boy come out for the body, and it breaks my heart. He asks why his son was killed, and I, again, wish we had gotten an answer, but of course Joe doesn't have one. It makes no sense. Pirate Foreman wasn't just killing Bishop men at random. He sought out this boy. Why? Luther helps the cook carry the boy's body away after Joe's offer to help bury him is declined. Again, this Concho cook's 2 lines are delivered so well that I remember his character. It's too bad that doesn't happen with Adam's smattering of lines. Joe buries his face in Cooch's saddle, and the emotion Mike conveys with no line at all, and all body language, is gut-wrenching. Jessup takes this opportunity to confront him. Joe tells us that Jessup's brother was killed in a fair fight, to which he doesn't deny it, but asks about the two others that were killed in an attempt at whataboutism. He then threatens to kill all the Cartwrights one at a time. He then gives him a particularly venomous threat of, "Stay away from Amy, or I'll kill you right in front of her eyes." Joe draws his gun faster than Jessup can, and Amy runs out between them, which really wasn't a good idea, girlie. I like that you're trying to protect him, but yeesh, you can get shot. Luther breaks it up and sends Joe on his way. He tells him he's only letting him live because of his courage in bringing the boy back. Later that night, Ben and the other 2 boys are still waiting for Joe to return. Again, Adam is calmly reading and doesn't seem too worried, while Haas tries to convince Ben not to be too hard on Joe. They give father and youngest son the room when Joe finally returns. The 2 share one of those classic JPMs that so many of us fans live for. That's Joe Pa moments, by the way. Joe at last comes out and tells Ben about his love for Amy. Ben assures him with the very best Ben line of the entire series, "I've never held my land above my son's. Before that would happen, I'd destroy the Ponderosa." I love that line so much that back when we were all on Bonanza World, it was quoted on my profile signature line. Both men are crying, and it is fantastic. I can imagine that many fans who don't have this kind of relationship with their own parents just live for these scenes. The following morning, Ben and Luther finally get a scene together. While they talk things out and Ben assures him that he didn't kill that fence rider of Luther's, Jessup sneaks off back to the house where Amy is alone. Luther tells Ben that he has nothing against Joe, but Amy is young and she doesn't want to leave him. Ben suggests letting Amy tell them that herself, and Luther invites Joe to go get her. Sadly, Jessup's gotten there first and attacks her. She breaks free long enough to run into the barn, where he corners her again. Normally this might seem like one of those horror movie tropes where the girl runs the wrong way, but she literally had nowhere else to go. Jessup's true intentions are finally revealed. Joe hears her screaming and confronts him while he's on top of her, tearing at her clothing. Jessup reminds Joe that he is unarmed, and Joe puts down his own gun. Honestly, nobody would have blamed you if you had just held your gun on him and taken him to town right then. No fight necessary. That's not what happens, though. They do fight. I actually didn't notice this until my most recent watch of this episode, and when I did, I shouted obscenities at the TV. But when Jessup throws the pitchfork, he is looking directly where Amy is. He was aiming for her. It was one of those if I can't have her, nobody can moments. After he throws it, and we have yet to see where it hit, he goes after Joe again, who stabs him. Jessup finally dies, and so ends James Coburn's debut on this show. Joe, with a huge blister above his eye, that I remember feeling physical pain over the first time I saw it, looks up to see Amy stabbed by the pitchfork. In the final scene, they are all gathered in Luther's living room, wherein the doctor says he's done all that he can, and that she just wants to see Joe. Now, I read a fanfic once where the writer explains with Joe's inner monologue that his line at the end was because he felt guilty that she didn't ask to see her father instead. He repeats the line that she had said just before he asks her to marry him. She said it could never be, a Cartwright and a bishop. I disagree with that writer's analysis, because when Joe goes in, she says she's going to be okay. The doctor told her she was going to live. She didn't know she was dying, so she didn't realize that she only had a moment left to see her father one final time. She might have asked to see both of them had she known. I don't blame the doctor for not telling her. I'm just pointing out that most likely she was informed. That was what informed her decision. Joe plays along and tells her that they are going to live on the Truckee Strip. She dies talking about the house they will build. Joe sobs hard, but briefly, before coming out and delivering that line. I think his reason for saying it was that Amy's prediction ultimately came true. Ben puts a hand on Luther's shoulder, and then we see the four ride out. I really do like this episode, mainly for the family bonding moments that we get, and also that it's a really cute love story for Joe. The Romeo and Juliet theme that is subverted by only one lover dying is really well done too, I think. I wish there had been a line about Carter being arrested, or at least acknowledged for his role in the feud. It's likely it wouldn't have gone on that long without him and Jessup stirring the pot. Luther, I'm sure, felt incredibly guilty for trusting Jessup after what he ended up doing to Amy. I know they didn't have time for all of that and the focus was on the Cartwrights, but it might have been nice for Ben to give Luther the land now, because that's something I think Ben would do. Carl Benton Reed is great as Luther. He's very fatherly like Ben, which makes it all the more of a shame that they never got along. I would also have liked to know how Carter had so much power over the bank. Did he own it? I assume that he did, but they never expressly say that. S. John Lawner looks like a banker, so that tracks. Overall, the tragic love story is done very nicely. Joe wanting to marry Amy is much more believable than some of the others he would go on to propose to later. I enjoy the softer side of him, who is less concerned with girl pretty, and more in the fact that he has a connection with this particular girl. I could see them married even though they were really young. I can see Ben being Amy's father-in-law and Luther being Joe's. But this was season 1, and we can't have a happy Cartwright for too long, folks. I did miss Hop Sing in this one too, actually. I recommend this episode to any Joe gals, and definitely if you love those Joe Pa moments.